We have been discovering in this series that although life is incredibly uncertain, God is not uncertain. Even when it looks like life is spinning out of control, God is not alarmed, he's not stressed, he's not doing deep breaths, chanting serenity now. God's going to be just fine. He still has the whole world in his hands. Now, most of us, the truth is, we have pretty certain intentions about how we want to live our lives, the kind of lives that we want to lead. We know the kind of people that we want to be. We know the kind of relationships that we would like to have. We want good things, that's normal. But often, we just seem to get off track along the way. Life kind of trips us up. I remember hearing about a motivational speaker by the name of Charlie Shedd. And before he had children, he used to do a talk called 10 Commandments for Raising Perfect Children. and then he and his wife had a child, and he changed the talk to 10 Hints for Parents. And then they had another child, and this is what he titled his thing, A Few Tentative Suggestions for Fellow Strugglers. Then they had a third child, and he quit doing the talk altogether. Well, see, life has this way of making sure that we realize that we're not in control. Now, we may have a dream, we may get some kind of inspiration from God, but then we run into quicksand along the way. Circumstances become all too uncertain, and we see ourselves drifting off course, and then we wonder, what in the world happened? I thought I had this figured out. I had a plan. Well, today I want us to look at a great example in the scriptures of a guy who started out brilliantly, but the next decade of his life was nothing but uncertainty. And this story goes all the way back long before Jesus in the Old Testament, but a man by the name of David. And we're going to see God at work in his life. At the beginning of David's life, remarkable things begin to happen to him. One day, the prophet at that time, Samuel, he comes and seeks out David, finds him, and tells him that David has found favor with God. He actually anoints David for God's purposes. Great things are going to happen in this young man David's life. And for a while they did. And sometimes life turns out that way for a while. David ends up getting called to the palace, and he becomes a favorite of the king. King Saul just loves David. David is his favorite musician. David ends up becoming best friends with the king's son. And then he marries the king's daughter, which is an incredible career move back then, and probably still is today. David becomes a warrior, and he's incredibly successful. He's so wildly heroic that people sang songs about his greatness, about how great David was. Everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. He led a charmed life. But then a funny thing happened on his way up to the top. One by one, all of these wonderful things that he had achieved or had been given to him began to get stripped away. King Saul, his biggest fan, got jealous of his success, got jealous of the songs that people would sing about David. And one day, King Saul picks up a spear and throws it at David, trying to kill him. So David has to flee for his life. So he loses his job, he loses his income, he loses his security, and some of you know what that's like. Then he loses his marriage. Some of you know what that's like. Now, David's wife, who was King Saul's daughter, remember, she ends up being taken back by Saul because kings could do that in those days. And he actually gives his daughter to be married to another man. So David now has lost his marriage, he's lost his family, lost his position. And he goes from there to go see the prophet Samuel, who is kind of like his spiritual mentor. But then King Saul hears about it. He sends soldiers after David, knowing that he's going to be there. And so Saul has to make another escape. Soon after that, Samuel dies. David will never get a chance to spend any time with his mentor again. He's gone. We talk about uncertainty. David tries to run to his best friend, Jonathan. And Jonathan loves David, but he's not about to pick up a sword and go against his own father, the king. So David has to run away one more time, and he will never see his best friend again. That's how bad it is for David. Then it gets worse. Israel is so hot for him that he's got to leave. So he loses his home now, his culture, his language, and think about this. He's got nowhere to go. So he runs for refuge to a city that's completely outside of Israel at the time, a city called Gath. Gath was the home of a guy that you might remember, kind of a big guy, probably took steroids or something. David engaged him with a sling and a stone. Everybody remember that guy's name? Goliath. Goliath. Gath is the city that Goliath is from, the city of Philistines. So David is so desperate, that's where he runs for refuge, to his enemies. And to try to get them to have pity on him, he pretends to be insane. He's literally foaming at the mouth, scratching on the city gates, trying to get them to let him in and live there, but they won't let him live there, and he ends up being chased out, and he ends up living in a cave. Lives in a cave. This is David, who had once been in the palace not that long ago. He had wealth, he had power, he had fame, he had friends, he had security, he had a future. He was the golden boy. And now all that's gone. He's got no money, he's got no home, he's got no friends, no job, no mentor anymore. He's running for his life, and he's living in a stinking cave. Now, the cave is where you end up when all of your security, all of your props, all of your certainty, all the gifts and awards and all that stuff gets stripped away. The cave is a place you end up when you thought you were going to have a great life, but then all your hopes turn to dust. It's clear that things are not going to turn out the way that you had hoped. Cave is where visions and dreams go to die, kind of like the head coach's office of the Florida Gators. And some of you know you're in a cave right now of some sort. Maybe you had a career dream of what you wanted to do, and it was a good dream, but it hasn't happened. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe there's enormous financial pressure on you. Maybe you're worried about it every day. You wake up worried about it. That's living in a cave. Or maybe it's a relationship. Maybe you lost a marriage to divorce or to death or to desertion. Or maybe you wanted a relationship so bad, but it never really happened for you. Or maybe it did, but then it turned out so badly. You got betrayed or disappointed or something went wrong. You're in a cave. Maybe you made some bad decisions. Anybody here ever make a bad decision? I bought a Renault Le Car. That probably qualifies. We've all made bad decisions. And maybe you ask, how did I end up here? I had such bright hopes, and now I've drifted, and I'm involved in behavior I can't even understand. Where did I go wrong? I've drifted. I don't even know myself anymore. How did I end up here? It's a kind of a cave of remorse. Maybe something happened to you. Maybe you lost your health. Maybe you regret not taking care of yourself. Maybe you find yourself alone. Maybe you betrayed some values that you thought ran pretty deep. Cave is a place of disappointment, regret, failure, fear, uncertainty. And it's a really strange thing because nobody sets out to end up in a cave. And we live in a culture where lots of us kind of pride ourselves on the ability to do cave avoidance. But sooner or later, everybody's going to log some time in a cave. Maybe not now, maybe it hasn't happened yet, but everybody logs some time there. Now, what's hardest about being in a cave is you begin to wonder if God's lost track of you. Did he forget his promises? Does he know that I'm here? Will I ever be anywhere else? Does he still have the whole world in his hands? One important thing we all need to know. God does some of his best work in caves. In molding, shaping, sometimes reshaping human lives. The cave, for reasons I don't fully understand, is where we find out that all we really have is God. All the other stuff that we wrap ourselves in is fickle at best. In the cave, you find out that God is enough. And sometimes the cave is where you meet God, the God who does his best work in those kind of environments. Now, it's a funny thing. When you look back on your life, when people look back on their lives, and you were to ask them, what made you grow spiritually? What was going on in your life when you met God or grew the most in patience or in trust or in faith? The number one answer always is, it was during the worst times, during the cave times, those times that we avoid like the plague. I've shared this before, but the very most difficult time for my parents in their life was when they finally realized their dream to open a neighborhood drugstore and pharmacy. It did not take long for that dream to turn into a multi-year nightmare after losing all of their life savings, going into the hole economically. It was just the worst experience they could go through, and it was tough to live through. But looking back on it now, decades later, and then looking at it sometimes from eternal perspectives, during those few years, some incredible things happened. They found a depth of faith and trust in God that they had not known before. And during that cave season, all 7 of their children, including me, came to personal faith in Jesus during that little period of time. So was that the worst season, or was it the best? Was it tough for them? You better believe it was. But looking back, they wouldn't trade it for all the success in the world. And God did restore them to financial health in miraculous timing as well. Well, David spent like 10 years of his life in the wilderness. 10 years. Everything was going so great. Then he ends up in a cave and spends 10 years in the wilderness. He was not entirely alone. He did have some people come to him to form a little community, but they were not a real promising group. In 1 Samuel 22, here's what it says about them. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Then others began coming, men who were in trouble, in debt, who were just discontented, until David was the captain of about 400 men. So David and this band of whiners kind of established a refugee community in a village called Ziklag. Ziklag. They have wives and families, and then one day they're called to go off to battle. They come back to their homes, and it's gone. It's all gone. Their village is gone. They've lost their wives, their sons, their daughters have been taken captive. They have lost everything. And the text says in 1 Samuel 30, it says, David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. You ever cry like that? I mean, life hits rock bottom. These are fugitives from their own country. They established a little refugee village, and now that's gone. They're so overwhelmed by sadness. They're so crushed that they cried until they could not cry. They wept until they had no strength left to weep. And then for David, it gets even worse. In verse 6, it says, David was greatly distressed because his own men were talking about stoning him. You ever have a bad day at work? Boss ever try to murder you? Probably not. David, a fugitive from his own country, his king tried to kill him, lost his mentor, lost his best friend, lost his wife, lost his family, lost his future, lost his reputation, lost his money, lost his home, lost everything. Then he finds the courage to launch a little startup out in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of whiners. And then things go south, and now they want to kill him. Life took a dump on David. And then comes one of the most amazing verses in the entire Bible. It says this in verse 6. David found strength in the Lord his God. Say that with me. David found strength in the Lord his God. That's it. David found strength not in his own resilience, not in his own intellect, not in his own planning, not in his own determination. David found strength in the Lord his God. So one human being finds God and something very, very big changes. And his circumstances are no different than before. None. Everything outside looks just the same as it has been for quite a while. But David has passed from death to life. Looked like the bottom had fallen out for David, but David had just fallen into the arms of God. David found strength in the Lord his God, who holds the whole world in his hands. Now, David would go on to live quite a remarkable life. Eventually, he'd be able to go back to Israel, and one day he becomes king, as most of you know. The people would look back on his day with such longing that when they thought about a Messiah who might come one day to save them, to redeem them, they would refer to such a one as the Son of David. It's like, if only we could have a king like that again someday. Again, David would know great highs. He would know incredible lows. He would achieve great victories, and he would make some huge mistakes. And I wonder if at some point David went back to that cave where he spent those years of uncertainty, where he lived all alone and he found strength in the Lord his God. Friends, God understands all about caves. Turns out that when Jesus came, the one who would be referred to as the Son of David, for a little while, just like David, everything went great. For a little while, a lot of the stuff that Jesus touched turned into gold, and people loved his teaching. They would come to Jesus, those who were in distress or discouraged or were sick or lame or lepers or were just shunned. They would come to him and he would heal them. He would touch them. He'd embrace them. And they loved him, and the word spread and the crowds got bigger until one day Jesus comes into Jerusalem. And they throw palm branches down before him and they say, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And they wanted to make him king, but he would not be that kind of king. And when the people found that out, they turned on him. And Jesus, the Son of David, also lost everything. Lost his position as a teacher, lost respect, lost safety. His friends that he counted on abandoned him when he needed them most. The Son of David also had huge crowds that were disappointed in his leadership. He also had people that wanted to kill him. And so they put him under arrest and sent him to a mockery of a trial, convicted him on bogus charges. Then they pummeled his body and put a crown of thorns on his head. They nailed him to a cross to die. And it was all the sin and guilt that put him there. The only sinless human life. The most unfair death that's ever been inflicted on any human being ever. Ironically, it was their sin that put him there. And not just their sin, it was mine too, and yours too. We put him there on that cross, and he died. And they all thought, well, that's the end of that. They put his body where they thought it would never be heard from again. They just forgot one thing. God does his best work in caves. The cave is where God resurrects dead stuff. Dead souls, dead marriages, dead relationships, dead visions. If you're in a cave, then you're in the best spot of all, because that is where God does his best work. Now, here is an unfortunate reality as we get older, as folks get older. Too often we'll hit a cave, and if it doesn't disappear right away, if it doesn't improve significantly right away, if there's something that's required of us, like growth or sacrifice or dying to what we want, well, that sometimes we'll kind of turn the corner and say, you know what, the truth is, I'm old enough, I think I'll just stay in this cave. I'm not willing to grow, I'm not willing to sacrifice, I'm not willing to change. Maybe instead, I'll just complain about what an unfair thing this particular cave is. Maybe other people will say, you poor thing. You poor thing. You shouldn't have to go through all this. I don't know why God is making you go through all this. It doesn't seem fair to me. And you think maybe that would make you feel better. But the truth is, you lose when you take that approach. You lose. Because sometimes people make that decision and they choose sad, miserable little lives. Their souls wither and die. Friends, don't do that. Don't do that. Because sometimes people make a different decision. They kneel down right in that cave and they say, God, I don't want to do life in my own strength anymore. I don't. I want every day for Jesus to be not just the forgiver of my sins, but I want him to be my friend and my companion and my leader and my guide. And I will do, Lord, with your help, whatever I need to do to arrange my life in such a way to where I can just stay in contact with you. I'd like to do life like that one day at a time for the rest of my time on this earth, and then forever in the world that's yet to come. That's what I want, Lord. You do that. Doing that does not mean that all your problems will be gone, because they will not. But you can find God's best right in that cave, in the uncertainty. You can know power to be forgiven, power to receive love, power to grow, power to forgive, power to love others, so that when you get to the end of your one and only life, you can look back on it and say, thank you, God. Thank you, God. You gave me real life, the life that is real life. Thank you for helping me to remember that you always have the whole world in your hands, and I can trust you.